Angela Demore is our speaker this morning. I've known Angela since I got here. She was just out, or maybe just finishing up her time at Westmont, where she does not mention this in her bio. She was an All-American soccer player. She's really something athletically, but that's not why we have her. We love Angela. We love her, her intelligence, her love for Christ, her love for students. She's the director of Campus Life. I've been advising WCSA and WACC, which is WAC, which is Westmont Activities Council. She's done a lot of things. She works on a job that's constantly a kind of a moving target. It's just variety is the norm. She's married to Brian, has 2 children, Luke and Maya, and she asked if she could share some things with us this morning in chapel, which I think are really timely and good. Angela, we love you. We appreciate you. We are eager to hear what God's given you to share with us this morning. Let's welcome our Director of Campus Life, Angela Demore.
Thanks. Good morning, friends. I've had the privilege of speaking in chapels twice since I arrived at Westmont in 2007. Some of you who have been around a little bit longer might recall that on both of the previous occasions I was pregnant. The first time I was pregnant with my son Luke, who's now 3.5, and the second time I was pregnant with my daughter Maya, who is 1.5. I am quite pleased to report that I am not pregnant this time around. Woohoo! Broke the streak. So, being a mom is by far, hands down, without a doubt, the hardest job that I've ever done. I had a feeling it would be difficult, but I had no idea how difficult it would be. Speaking of, my husband and Brian and I have a conspiracy theory regarding parenting, and that is that current parents are sworn to secrecy. So they are sworn to never to reveal the mind-boggling challenges of parenting. And so why, you may ask? Well, that's simple, to ensure that the human race continues. But maybe the more important question is, who's behind it? Who's behind this conspiracy theory? It's grandparents. It's grandparents, of course. They've done the dirty work. They've changed bazillions of diapers. They've stayed up late nights. They've had screaming in their ear. And it's time for their sweet reward. They're not going to give it up now, so they're driving the hamster wheel behind the whole conspiracy. So grandparents will keep life as we know it continued. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but truly, being a mom can be a weighty and sometimes heart-wrenching job. And I just encourage you, take a minute to thank your mom, if that's a possibility for you, for the ways that she's cared for you. She probably didn't do everything right, no moms do, but chances are quite good that she loved you this much, as I tell my kids. As far as my arms can go, I love you this much. Today I'm going to tell you a story, and this story involves my mom, and it's a true story about my life and about God's mysterious and wonderful faithfulness. I didn't expect to spend my 32nd year of life walking alongside my mom as she died of cancer. In fact, in some ways, it felt like her life, her good life, was just beginning. For perhaps the first time in her life, my mom felt truly alive. My mom grew up in rural New York State with 5 siblings. That's my mom. Her family was poor. They regularly attended the local Christian church. Most of what that meant was following a strict moral code emphasizing the way that Christians ought to live, including not going to the movies, not dancing, and dressing conservatively. Frequently, those who professed a belief in Christ in my mom's young life were harsh, cold, and hardened adults. She watched the most religious people in her life treat others with contempt and disdain. My mom's mother, my grandmother, struggled to show love to her children. She was constantly dissatisfied, and she sought a better and more fulfilling life. When my mom was just 3, her mom left one day, only to reappear 6 months later after her affair with another man had failed. My mom's father, my grandfather, accepted his wife back. He was likely desperate after trying to convince friends to take care of his 6 children while he worked long hours at the local factory. My mom sought every opportunity she could to build a new life, a better life for herself and her own family, but she struggled to do so as she battled serious bouts of depression. My mom and dad were married in 1973 in Wenham, Massachusetts, a hippie-ish wedding at sunrise with a breakfast reception. My mom made her own wedding gown, a simple yet elegant floor-length cotton and polyester gown. This is my mom and dad on their wedding day. And my mom and dad were happy, sometimes. My mom was attracted to my dad's reliability, his predictable ways, his stability. But generally, the two were incompatible, and they were warned of this during their premarital counseling, but they were in love, and so they got married. My brother and I entered the picture within the next 5 years. That's my brother hiding behind the plant behind the couch. He always made life interesting. My family attended a tiny, non-denominational church that preached the gospel message and required that all of you be devoted to Jesus. The outside of our family looked pretty good, but the insides were disintegrating. Every Sunday afternoon, on the ride home from church, the wheels would fall off, metaphorically speaking, and our conversations would devolve into loud arguments between my mom or dad and my brother. I mostly sat quietly in the back seat of our station wagon, terrified that my family would become permanently broken, that the pieces would not be put back together. Most often, the end result was that my mom stopped speaking with us. The deadly silent treatment would last anywhere from a few hours to a few days. When I was in 6th grade, my mom decided that she was unsatisfied with her career as a teacher and a librarian, and she went back to school, 2 years for X-ray and another 2 years for radiation therapy. She got a job and began caring full-time for those battling cancer. Attending church was no longer a priority for my parents. My mom became increasingly bitter and angry with her circumstances and with God, who she believed did not fulfill his promise to give peace to those who had faith in him. She was explosive at times toward herself, us, and God. Mostly, her anger spiraled her into depression and left her comatose in bed for days, hours, who knows how long. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, nothing was ever said. No apologies, no conversation, and no reconciliation. This wreaked havoc on our family, as you can imagine. At first, my dad, my brother, and I thought that it was our fault. We needed to be more kind, more loving, more sensitive to my mom. But after a while, we realized that we were helpless against my mom's disease. During my sophomore year of high school, I knew I needed to make a significant change in my own life. I was lonely, selfish, and wandering. The gospel truth I'd heard in church at a young age stuck with me, and I knew it was time for me to seek God and the support of a local Christian community. So I began attending a large local youth group. I just showed up one night all alone, and in many ways, my life changed immediately and dramatically. I like to think that God was just waiting for me to step toward him so that he could just scoop me up in his loving arms. I experienced a sense of freedom for the first time in my life. My life was no longer only about myself. God promised that he was in control. I finally had a refuge for the times when life was too difficult for me to handle on my own, which seemed to be quite often. At age 15, I began to pray regularly and passionately that God would break the chains inside my mom's soul. And there wasn't a week that went by when I didn't utter that prayer. At times, things would improve temporarily, but mostly my adolescent years were spent trying to gauge my mom's mood to determine where exactly to walk around the eggshells that littered our home and our life. Amidst the tenuous way, my mom was also a remarkable woman. She was one of the strongest women I knew. If she made up her mind, she could do just about anything. For her 60th birthday, my mom decided that she was going to hike Mount Washington, the highest peak in the East. And hike it she did. That's my mom in the middle with the Viking cap. She was a creative genius, constantly redecorating, making quilts, rugs, Halloween costumes, socks, pillowcases, bags, and really whatever struck her fancy. She had an eye for design. She used her creative prowess to tend her beautiful gardens. It was quiet and tranquil in her garden. My mom's projects, I believe, were her only serenity at times. They offered a temporary reprieve for the deep pain and sadness and anger that so often threatened her well-being. Despite her pain, my mom made things happen, and she was determined to offer her children, my brother and I, every single opportunity that she never had. And as my mom's only daughter, she had big dreams for me, which was a sweet blessing and a painful curse. I set my sights on Columbia University for college. I was a strong scholar, and I was recruited there for soccer, so I appeared to be a shoo-in. However, after receiving a small envelope in the mail, indicating that I had been placed on Columbia's wait list, my mom was devastated. She laid in bed for days. When I attempted to comfort her, my mom suggested that I quit playing soccer and that I take up singing because it wasn't worth playing soccer for the other schools I was considering. My mom's disease was so debilitating that she could not see beyond it. Out of her own hurt, she hurt others. Not only was I challenged to overcome my own great disappointment, but I had to overcome her disappointment as well, and the guilt and shame that made me believe that I had let my mom down. And I continued to pray, break the chains in her soul, Lord. I prayed this prayer weekly, sometimes daily. But I needed some space and distance from the heartache, and I knew I needed to begin building a new foundation for my own life that was not rooted on such shaky ground. And on a last-minute whim, I applied to a small school called Westmont on the other side of the country. Sight unseen, I got in, and I accepted. I was moving across the country to California. While the distance helped, my mom's grand expectations for my life continued to define our interactions. I felt I could never quite make her happy, despite achieving significant accolades. I ended up graduating Westmont summa cum laude, received the Dean's Award at graduation, and as Ben mentioned, was an All-American in soccer. Our team won the first of a series of national championships, and not once was my mom ever able to say, "Well done." She was on to the next thing. I just longed for the day when my mom and I would simply be able to be together, to talk and share our lives together. And I continued to pray regularly throughout my 4 years at Westmont, God, break the chains in her soul. After graduation, I stayed in Santa Barbara for a year and then returned to East Coast for graduate school at the University of Vermont. During this time, I met Brian. This is Brian and I on our first date. Although I felt Brian was a little rough around the edges, he was sensitive, he loved the Lord, and he was a man of great integrity. Eventually, we determined we wanted to spend our lives together. I could tell my mom had been excited at the prospect of me getting married, and I hoped that one day we could share the joy of planning a wedding. But somehow, my mom had determined that Brian was not the man for me. She did everything she could to ignore him, and once she asked me, "Is he even smart?" One of the hardest moments of my life was the moment that I told my mom that Brian and I would soon be engaged. There was silence on the other end of the phone, and finally my mom uttered, "I don't know if I can live if you marry him." I was speechless and devastated. Once more, my hope of sharing this special time with my mom was being ripped away. I slowly determined that I couldn't be responsible for the way my mom was feeling. I was in an impossible situation. I continued to show her love and invited her in, but I needed to move forward with my life and my decision. In her mind, I had made my choice. I had chosen Brian and not her. She no longer picked up the phone when I called, and she had little desire to be part of my new life. And I continued to pray, God, break the chains. Please, please, break the chains in her soul. It's been 10 years, God. every week for 10 years. Do you hear me? I desperately want my mom. The first miracle was God's grace on my husband, Brian, who somehow respected and liked my mom from day one, despite the fact that she disdained him for no good reasons. Miraculously, he never took her coldness personally. I believe God cloaked him with a blanket of grace that allowed us to continue to engage her with compassion. A glimmer of hope surfaced within my mom when Brian and I announced that we were pregnant with our first child in the spring of 2009. My mom was thrilled at the prospect of being a grandmother and refocused her attention on the advent of the baby. We scheduled a joint vacation with my parents for a week-long stay in San Francisco, and a new, softer side of my mom crept into the picture. The anger and darkness from depression was less pronounced, and joy resurfaced in a newfound hope. While we still lived across the country from my parents, we kept in more regular touch. One evening, in October of 2010, my husband and I received a call from my parents asking us to speak with them on Skype when our son Luke was in bed. They needed to tell us something. It was one of those moments that stands etched into time eternally. Bad news is imminent, and you just wait to know how bad. Cancer. My mom had been recently diagnosed. It had been as much of a surprise to her as it was to us. It didn't look good, but a few weeks later, the final diagnosis was much worse than we expected. She was diagnosed with cholangiocarcinoma, a rare cancer of the bile ducts that is most often found in late stages after metastasizing or spreading. Although we didn't know it at the time, we learned that the average lifespan after diagnosis is 6 to 9 months. We hoped against hope that she would beat it. My husband Brian and I accelerated our own family plans, and we were thrilled to be pregnant with our second child. Shortly thereafter, we learned that my brother and his wife were expecting their first child, who was due the exact same day as ours, 2 days before my mom's birthday in July. Miracle number 2. At my husband's urging, I made the difficult decision to leave Santa Barbara for 3 months and to spend the duration of my maternity leave in Massachusetts with my mom and dad. This would mean birthing my baby in another state with the possibility that my husband would not be there for the birth. It also meant moving my 1.5-year-old son to Massachusetts for 3 months while I was 8.5 months pregnant. But in a leap of faith, we took the risk, knowing there may not be another opportunity to spend this type of time with my mom. Shortly after my mom's diagnosis, her transformation exploded. Almost immediately, she began attending the local church with my dad. When the pastor offered to meet with her, she responded, "Of course I'll meet with him. Isn't that what pastors are supposed to do?" During the summer of 2011, we spent hot, lazy summer days in the backyard in Massachusetts, or at the beach or at the park, drawing faces on watermelons, fishing with our plastic fishing rods, and growing bigger by the day. Me with a baby, and my mom with fluid in her abdomen, a byproduct of the cancer that had invaded her liver. My son Luke was beside himself to discover orange popsicles, and Yaya, my mom's grandma named for herself, couldn't help but to spoil him rotten. My daughter Maya took her time to enter the world, but on the night of July 21st, 2011, 3 days after she was due, my mom was beside me when the little angel was born. I believe part of the reason she came into the world was to escort my mom into heaven. My mom was the first person to hold the little angel. This is moments after Maya was born. My mom and I were finally able to be together. Finally, to talk, to share our lives together. We talked about what heaven would be like. We talked about our plans for the future and our joys of the past. And my mom assured me that she wasn't afraid to die. And that's when I knew that she was going to die. And that's when I became aware that the chains had been broken in my mom's soul. She was cloaked in peace, joy, patience, and kindness that was formerly non-existent in her life. She was joyful in hope, patient in her affliction, and faithful in prayer. She lived her last 12 months epitomizing Romans 12:12. And for one of the first times in my life, I wanted to be like my mom. She was a strong, faithful, feisty woman of God. My prayers had been heard. Yes, all these years, my prayers had been heard and answered. Miracle number 3. Despite what you might think, miracles and pain are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes miracles happen when suffering is most profound. When the summer of 2011 was wrapping up, I returned to Santa Barbara with Luke and Maya to resume normal life. My mom's health deteriorated rapidly. Maya and I flew back to Massachusetts a few times to be with my mom. On one occasion, I was able to join my mom and the girls, her precious group of 4 girlfriends, for dinner. My mom could barely walk from the car to her friend's kitchen table, but she was determined to be there. We had important work to do. With Bibles, songs, and teacups in hand, we planned my mom's memorial service. There was nothing I'd rather do less and more than to be in that place. God did not bring cancer on my mom so that her heart would be changed. I want to say that again. He did not bring cancer on my mom so that her heart would be changed. But rather, in his love for his precious child, he knew that her body would succumb to this disease. And he used it to break the chains inside her soul and to draw his precious child back to him so that she could spend eternity in his arms. But I'd say this story isn't simply about God's faithfulness in answering prayer either. No, God didn't need my prayers to convince him to save my mom. Through his power and grace, he invited me to participate in his eternal plan by loving and praying so that he would be glorified and so that I could see and know him more in the midst of this tragedy. It was difficult to explain the loss of his Yaya to my 2-year-old son. One day she was there, and the next day she wasn't. We explained that she went up to heaven to be with God and to tend his beautiful garden. To this day, we periodically look up to heaven, and we wave and we say, "Hi, Yaya." I'd like to show you the final miracle. About a month before my mom passed away, I arranged for Life Chronicles, a nonprofit group, to come and to film my mom in her home, sharing messages to her children and her grandchildren. Here's my mom and a few of her words for me and my family.
And she keeps asking me, what should I do? What would make the best sense? And it's so hard for a mother to know the right things to say to their child when they're about to undertake a pretty significant change in their lives. But they love their family and they want the best for their family. So Angela, I know you'll make the best choice. I know things will come out the way you want them to because you are trusting the right persons. And yes, you've picked the right husband. But you'll do well. You and Brian and the 2 kids, you'll all do well. So keep on keeping on. And I'll be looking from above. And I'll haunt you if you don't.
You chose the right husband. I never thought I'd hear my mom say that. I've found from personal experience that the last holdout in a stubborn and hardened heart is to admit when we're wrong or when we've made a mistake. And only God can break these kinds of chains, and break them he did. Let's pray. Oh, thank you, God, for the power of your mighty Spirit to break the chains within our hardened, sinful hearts, and to free us to know your peace, your joy, your grace, and your love. Thank you for the relationships we have with friends and family, even when they're really hard. And thank you that we can pray and that you hear and answer our prayers. And thank you for conducting the magnificent orchestra of which you have invited us to play an integral part. God, you are good. Amen.